I came home in the same boots I wore dragging Ethan through a minefield, blood crusted in the sole, Syria dust still clinging to the laces. And the first thing my mother said to me, "Did you really have to come in looking like that?" If you've ever returned home expecting open arms but got cold eyes instead, you know that silence can bruise deeper than shrapnel. My name's Emery Blake. I was 35 when I came back from war. Not just any war, a covert mission in Syria that left me with scars the VA didn't know how to name and ghosts I didn't know how to bury. But none of that seemed to matter when I walked through my parents' front door for the first time in 3 years. Mom didn't flinch. She didn't hug me, didn't cry. She stared at my boots like I'd tracked in filth. "You're dripping sand on the floor," she muttered, already wiping it up. Dad didn't even glance up from his plate. And my older brother Brent, who's never served a day in his life, let out a low chuckle. "Wow," he said. "You look worse than the guys you were trying to save." I hadn't even put my duffel down. No welcome home, no we missed you, just salad bowls clinking and some chatter about shrimp prices at the local market. It was surreal, like I had time-travelled into a family that never had me. At dinner, I sat at the edge of the table. No one asked what it felt like to carry a dying man on my back through enemy fire. No one wanted to hear about nights I screamed into a pillow so I wouldn't wake the barracks. They wanted the normal Emery, the silent one, pretty, presentable, not too intense. So I kept quiet. I passed the bread. When Brent joked about his real estate business, I laughed along. When Dad asked Samantha, my little sister, about her yoga retreat, I sipped water like I cared. But inside, I was fraying. I'd stitched other people together under mortar fire, but I couldn't stitch myself into this family. After dinner, I excused myself and went upstairs to my old room, only it wasn't mine anymore. The posters were gone, my books gone, replaced by pastel throw pillows and a Peloton. They'd turned my room into a guest workout studio. I stood there for a minute, staring at where my childhood bed used to be. The only thing left was a small box on the closet shelf, labelled Emery, keep if needed. Inside was a stack of letters I'd written from the field, unopened. Not a single envelope had been slit open. 3 years, 17 letters, not one opened. And that was when it hit me, not like a grenade, but like slow poison. They didn't forget me. They chose to pretend I didn't matter. And honestly, that hurt more than anything I'd seen over there, because when the enemy shoots at you, at least you know where the danger's coming from. But here, it came with casseroles and polite smiles. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. Not the calming kind, the kind of quiet that says, you don't belong here anymore. Around 3 a.m., I got up and walked outside barefoot, standing under the old oak tree in the yard. The same tree my grandfather, also a veteran, used to tie his flag to every Memorial Day. It wasn't there anymore. They'd replaced it with a string of solar lights and a live laugh love sign. I stood there breathing in the cold, and for the first time since I got home, I let myself cry. Not for what I'd seen, but for what I'd lost. I wasn't part of this family anymore. I was just a passing visitor, a problem they didn't know how to package. You see, revenge stories don't always start with betrayal. Sometimes they start with being forgotten, with being erased quietly, until one day you decide, no more. The next morning, I folded my uniform and put it in my duffel. Not because I was ashamed, but because I knew now that no one in this house would ever understand what it meant. Before heading to the airport, I stopped by the dining room. Dad was reading the paper. Mum was scrolling her phone. I said quietly, "I'll be leaving now." No one looked up. Mum mumbled, "Don't forget your boots. They're filthy." I nodded, picked them up, and walked out. That was the last time I stepped foot in my parents' house, but not the last time they'd hear my name, not by a long shot. A week after I got back, my mum told me we were doing a family gathering for Grandpa's memorial. Just a simple thing, she said, brushing her hand through the air. Nothing formal. You don't need to wear all that. She meant my uniform. I nodded anyway. I didn't want to argue, not after the way she looked at me when I first walked through the door. But what she didn't know was that I needed this. Not for show, not for drama, but because Grandpa was the only one in the family who ever really saw me. He was the reason I enlisted. He used to say, service doesn't ask for applause, just purpose. So on the day of the memorial, I put on my pressed uniform, polished my boots, straightened the badge I never wore outside the base. And when I stepped into the room, everything stopped, just for half a second, not because I looked sharp, but because I looked out of place. My brothers were in suits. Samantha was in a pale blue dress. The decorations were all light, soft, Pinterest perfect. And there I was, dark green, boots heavy, scars peeking under my sleeve. Mum walked over fast, her voice low but sharp. "Emery, can you just stand off to the side for photos? Let the boys be centre. It'll look balanced." I blinked. "You want me out of the photo?" No, of course not. Just not in the middle, okay? You kind of stand out." So I stepped aside. I stood near the edge of the frame, just like I always did, physically present, emotionally erased. And when the camera clicked, I wasn't even sure if my shoulder made it into the shot. Afterward, I hovered near the lemonade table, listening to everyone talk about Grandpa's fishing trips, his jokes, the cabin. No one mentioned he served in Wabuktu. No one said a word about the flag folded next to his urn. Just laughter, shrimp cocktail, wedding plans for Brent. At one point I tried to chime in. "I remember when Grandpa showed me how to polish a rifle for inspection." Mom cut me off. "You don't need to bring that stuff up. It's a memorial, not boot camp." Then she smiled sweetly and turned back to her friends. I stared at my lemonade. It was sweating in my hand, same as I was in that room. What do you even say in a moment like that? I mean, honestly, if someone told you to stay out of a family photo at your own grandfather's memorial, what would you do? Would you say something? Or just let it slide like I did? If you've ever stood on the edge of a picture, hoping to be included, yeah, I get you. And maybe you get me too. Later that evening, I tried to share a light story. A teammate once joked that I had ninja hands for stitching under fire. It always made people laugh. I thought maybe, just maybe, someone here would find it human. But Mom sighed and rolled her eyes. "You've told that one before," she said. "And anyway, you make it sound like you were fighting. You were just a medic. It's not like you saw combat." I didn't say a word, just reached into my jacket pocket and touched the corner of the latex glove I always kept with me. Not as a symbol, not even for comfort, but because it was the exact same kind I used to hold Ethan's intestines in place as he screamed for his mother. They'd never know that. They didn't want to. I looked around the room, smiles, drinks clinking, chatter about internships and Airbnbs. And I knew this wasn't my house anymore. It wasn't even my family. It was just a well-decorated stage I used to have a line on. And now I was just background noise. But then someone slipped something under my hand, so gently I barely noticed. It was a torn piece of paper. I looked up. It was Lily, Brent's daughter, 17, barely said a word all night. The note said, "What did you really do, Aunt Emery?" I didn't answer. I just smiled, folded the note, slipped it into my palm, because for the first time since I'd come home, someone looked at me like I was worth asking about. Someone didn't want the filtered version. She wanted the truth. And right then, in that tiny moment, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not healing, not closure, just space. Space to keep going. To anyone listening right now, if you've ever been asked to step aside so the perfect version could stand center, if you've been cropped out, quieted, rewritten in your own story, tell me. because I don't think I'm the only one. And if someone's ever handed you a moment of quiet understanding, like Lily did for me, hold on to that. You have no idea how rare it is. 3 days after the memorial, I was still reeling. I kept replaying that moment, Mum moving me out of the family photo like I was some awkward guest that didn't quite match the colour scheme. I tried to tell myself I was being dramatic, that it wasn't personal. But you know what? It was. It always had been. I woke up that morning still clutching Lily's note. I didn't even realise I'd slept with it under my pillow. What did you really do, Aunt Emery? That question echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. What did I really do? I saved lives. I held a man's chest closed with both hands while his lungs collapsed. I stayed awake for 36 hours straight, patching wounds with duct tape and gauze because our supplies got torched in an ambush. But in this house, none of that mattered. To them, I was still the girl who didn't go to business school, still the daughter who chose the military over a real career. That afternoon, I went to check the mailbox. Bills, coupons, one letter with my name printed in clean raised letters, no return address, just a navy blue envelope with a gold seal on the back. I almost threw it out, thinking it was some generic recruitment flyer. But something stopped me. I peeled it open at the kitchen counter. Inside was a thick cardstock invitation, embossed, gold-trimmed with the Department of Defense emblem in the corner. It read, Captain Emery Blake, you are hereby invited to attend a formal recognition ceremony honouring distinguished service by female combat veterans. Location, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Date, November 10th, 1900 A.Rs. Dress code, full honours, formal military attire. Signed, Chief of Staff, Joint Task Command. I read it 3 times before I could actually breathe. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. I'd never been formally recognised before. No medals, no speeches, just quiet nods and closed files. But there it was, my name. Not an alias, not a code. Me. For the first time in months, I felt something that resembled warmth, like someone had lit a match in the middle of all that numb. I walked into the living room where Mom was folding laundry. Dad sat on the recliner flipping channels. I held the letter in my hand. I got something today, I said. Mom didn't look up. Coupons? No, I said. An invitation. From the Pentagon. That got Dad's attention, barely. To what? He asked, eyes still on the screen. A ceremony. They're honouring female combat vets. Real recognition. Full military honours. Silence. Brent, from across the room, snorted. Probably just filling a quota. Samantha blinked at me like I'd spoken in another language. Mum finally glanced at the letter in my hand. You're going to DC for that? Yes, I said, voice steady. She rolled her eyes. Emery, do you always have to make everything about you? That line, that was the one. I didn't shout, I didn't cry, I just folded the letter back into its envelope. Forget I said anything, I whispered. I walked upstairs, shut the door, and stood there staring at the floor. Then I opened my closet. My uniform was still there, pressed, sharp, untouched since I got home. I pulled it out, ran my fingers over the patchwork, the stitching from the time I sewed my sleeve shut with fishing line in the field. It wasn't just a uniform, it was a memory, 1,000 ghosts stitched into fabric. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. I went downstairs, opened the trash, pulled out the envelope I'd tossed there earlier, taped it together, corner by corner, smoothing the creases out like I was fixing something sacred. Then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I opened my laptop, booked a one-way ticket to DC. No round trip, no promise I'd come back. Because something had snapped in me, not with rage, but with resolve. I didn't need applause. I didn't need a standing ovation. I just needed to be somewhere where I didn't have to apologize for surviving, where the sound of my voice didn't make people wince, where my uniform wasn't a stain on someone's living room aesthetic. And maybe, just maybe, I could find one person who'd say, "I see you." Not the version my family edited, not the girl they wish I had been, but me. Have you ever gotten news that should have been the best thing in your life, and had it dismissed like it was nothing, like your proudest moment was just another inconvenience to someone else? If you know that sting, you're not alone. Some of us grow up thinking we have to shrink to fit into someone else's comfort, but sometimes the best thing we can do is get on that plane and never look back. The Pentagon is not what movies make it out to be. It's colder, quieter, and when you're walking through it alone, in a uniform that still smells faintly of dust and adrenaline, it's a strange kind of sacred. I arrived early, didn't want to be late, didn't want to miss it, didn't want to give anyone a reason to second guess why I was there. The other women being honoured had families, husbands, wives, kids, proud parents beaming in the front row. I sat in the back, alone. I didn't send the invitation to my family. They wouldn't have come, or worse, they would have, just to smirk through it. So I didn't give them the chance. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking a little, not from fear, from memory. They'd once held lives together with bare palms. Now they were folded neatly in my lap, waiting for someone to say, "She mattered." The ceremony began, a voice over the mic, a slideshow of names, photos, grainy footage from operations the public was never meant to see. Then, it happened. Helmet cam footage rolled across the screen. Syria, medevac zone, Charlie, a woman dragging a wounded soldier through rubble, yelling into a dead radio, blood staining her gloves. It was me. No one else had that footage. No one was supposed to. But someone kept it. Someone remembered. The room went silent. And then the announcer said, "Captain Emery Blake, please rise." My heart stopped. I stood slowly. Boots scuffed. Badge slightly crooked. Uniform imperfect but real. People turned, not to the screen, to me. And that's when he walked out. The President of the United States, not a representative, not a commander's assistant, the man himself. He walked straight toward me, held out his hand, and said, "You are a hero, Captain Blake, one we'll never forget." He was wearing a lapel pin, small, black, barely visible, but I recognized it instantly. It was from our covert ops unit, the one we were sworn never to wear in public. I felt tears push up, uninvited. I squeezed his hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to, because in that moment I was no longer invisible. Not to him, not to this room, and finally, not to myself, to anyone watching. Have you ever stood alone in a room full of people and still felt like it was the first time someone actually saw you? Yeah, me too. But sometimes it only takes one person saying you matter to start stitching your worth back together. And that moment? That was mine. The ceremony should have been enough. It should have closed something inside me, stitched up a part of my identity that had been unraveling since the day I got home. But instead, it lit a fuse. Because standing in that room, feeling the President's hand in mine, hearing my name spoken with reverence, not mockery, I realized something. They remembered me. But what about the ones who were erased completely? Like Ethan, the guy I dragged across rubble with my bare hands, the one who bled out in my lap, whispering, "Don't tell my mum I cried." He never got a ceremony, just a folded flag and a line in a file. Non-combat fatality, deemed stable. Stable. That word haunted me, because I'd seen the real report, I'd written it, and someone had changed it, swapped out the photos, softened the language, buried the reality. Ethan hadn't died because of enemy fire. He died because of silence, because leadership didn't want to admit that our unit was crumbling from the inside. So when I left the Pentagon that night, I didn't go back to my hotel. I went straight to the apartment of someone they never wanted me to talk to. Clara Weston. Investigative journalist, feared by generals, trusted by no one inside the system. I showed her everything, the letters, the glove, the tampered report, and most importantly, Ethan's note. A crumpled, tear-stained scrap of paper I'd found in his locker. If they ask, tell them I smiled. But you know the truth. I wasn't stable. I was scared. And no one listened. Clara didn't blink. She just nodded and started typing. She worked fast. 3 weeks later, her article hit the front page of the Washington Sentinel. Inside the second battlefield, the cost of military silence. My name wasn't on the byline, but my story, it was in every line. They tried to spin it. Military spokespeople went on air saying the report was out of context, that I was emotionally compromised. Then came the retaliation. My clearance was revoked. My email was locked. A public statement was released calling me unfit for further service. And still, I didn't flinch because I knew what was coming next. 3 days later, I got a call. Captain Emery Blake? Yes. This is Director Langston with the Oversight Committee. We'd like you to testify. I said yes before he finished the sentence. The room was colder than the Pentagon, smaller, fluorescent lights, no press, just closed doors and power. I walked in wearing no uniform, no rank, just a black blazer and the same boots from Syria, still stained at the sole. I laid Ethan's suicide note on the table, told them about the doctor who flagged his symptoms, the commanding officer who deleted it from the report, the medic who tried to resubmit it and was reassigned 2 days later. Me. For every name I gave, I handed over proof. Not stories, documents, dates, timestamps, chain of command. No one interrupted me. No one said, "You're overreacting." Because the paper trail was louder than their politics. Then they brought in Sarah, another soldier from my unit. She trembled as she walked in, but her eyes were steady. "I'm not here for revenge," she said. "I'm here because she," and she pointed at me, "saved my life." And then, softly, "If Emery Blake is dangerous, I wish every war zone had someone just like her." That was the moment the room shifted. Something cracked, not just in the walls of power, but in their silence. They couldn't bury this anymore. Not with a written confession, not with a grieving mother who went on national TV the next day, holding a photo of Ethan, reading his letter out loud. By the end of the month, Colonel Vance, our old CO, was relieved of duty. 2 doctors were put under investigation, and my record restored, not just reinstated, rewritten. It now read, "Distinguished Service, commended for ethical action under fire." When the email came through, I stared at it for 5 full minutes. I didn't cry. I just breathed. Because this wasn't about clearing my name anymore. This was about clearing space. For Ethan. For Sarah. For everyone who ever came home and got met with shrimp prices and salad bowls instead of "How are you still breathing?" Later that night, I sat alone in my hotel room, opened my journal, the same one I carried in Syria, the one stained with sweat and tears, and I wrote one line across the page: "Silence is heavy, but truth is louder." And you know what? They can try to discredit you, call you unstable, erase you from pictures and family stories. But when the truth walks into the room, it doesn't need a spotlight. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. And this time, that someone was me. I never thought I'd step foot on my family's property again. But life has a strange sense of irony. 3 months after the hearing, a substantial compensation check arrived, along with a letter of formal apology from the Pentagon. I stared at it for a long time, not because of the zeros, but because of what it represented. Validation. But I didn't want validation for myself. Not anymore. I'd found my voice. Now I wanted to make sure others didn't lose theirs. So I did something drastic. I bought back my family's property. The same land where my parents had quietly erased me from their lives. The house where I'd been treated like an unwanted guest, and the ground where I'd once stood, crying silently beneath an oak tree they'd cut down. They'd listed it for sale. Dad had retired, and they were moving to Florida. They probably thought selling it to a developer was harmless, just business. But I was faster. I put in an anonymous bid, higher than the asking price. When the realtor handed me the keys, I felt no triumph, only a quiet sense of justice. 3 days later, my parents got the official letter from my lawyer, politely informing them of the property's new ownership and that renovations would begin immediately. The house was to become the Ethan R. Veterans Resilience Center, a safe haven and mental health facility dedicated to soldiers returning from war. I expected angry calls, maybe a cold text from Brent, but nothing came. I felt only silence, and oddly enough, peace. Construction took 4 months. During that time, I slept in motels, on friends' couches, and occasionally in the half-built rooms of the new facility itself. Each day, I saw the space transforming, from the cold living room where my mother criticized my uniform, to a warm lobby with cozy armchairs and soft lights. The kitchen, where I'd stood alone, holding an unopened invitation, became a communal dining area where veterans could share stories freely. Every space was redesigned, every room reclaimed. Finally, the grand opening arrived. Dozens of veterans and their families stood outside. Some faces I recognized, others I'd never seen before. Media crews were there, but I wasn't nervous. For the first time, cameras didn't feel intrusive. They felt necessary, because the stories these soldiers carried deserved to be heard. I stood near the entrance, welcoming people quietly. I wore jeans and a sweater instead of a uniform, but the old boots, those I kept. Then Samantha appeared. My younger sister, who'd spent years watching quietly from the sidelines, approached slowly. I hadn't invited my family, but here she was anyway. She stopped a few feet away, tears glistening in her eyes. "Emery," she whispered, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything. I never should have stayed silent. I didn't know what to say." She hesitated, then added softly, "Mom and Dad, they don't understand yet, but I do now, and Lily does too." I smiled, squeezing her hand. "Thank you, Sam," I said quietly. That was enough, because healing isn't always big. Sometimes it's just a whisper of recognition, a small step toward forgiveness. Inside, the ceremony began. Speeches were short, heartfelt, honest. Sarah spoke, sharing how close she'd come to losing herself before we finally spoke up. Veterans stood, shared stories, cried openly without shame. Then it was my turn. I stepped up, looking at the faces, tired, strong, wounded, hopeful. "I built this place," I began, my voice steady, "because I know what it's like to come home to silence, to have the people you trusted most dismiss your pain, erase your stories, to feel invisible." The room quieted even more. I continued. "But invisibility is a lie we sometimes tell ourselves, one others can use against us, and the only way to defeat it is to speak. Loudly, softly, it doesn't matter. Just speak, because your story deserves to exist. Your survival matters." I paused, feeling my throat tighten. "This centre is named for Ethan Reyes, who didn't survive the silence," I said, voice barely audible now. "He wasn't stable, he was human, and we failed him. But we won't fail anyone else, not here." I stepped back, the weight of those words hanging in the air. Afterward, as people mingled, I saw Samantha again. Beside her stood Lily, holding a familiar folded note in her hand. The same note she'd slipped me months earlier, now worn from being opened countless times. "What did you really do, Aunt Emery?" Lily asked softly, echoing her written words. I took her hand gently. "I learned how to tell the truth, even when it scared me." She nodded, understanding. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone under the stars, the newly planted oak tree rustling gently behind me. For the first time in years, I felt completely at home. Not because I'd returned to the place where I grew up, but because I'd created something that mattered, something no one could erase. To everyone watching, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if your story has been erased or silenced, I hear you. This isn't just my story, it's ours. Have you ever been told your experiences didn't matter, that your truth wasn't convenient enough? Tell me in the comments. Share your story below, because every word matters, every story counts. And to anyone still sitting in silence, you're not alone. Your voice matters more than you know. Let's break this silence together. Thank you for being here, for listening, and most importantly, for speaking up. Don't forget to subscribe if this resonated with you, because this is just the beginning. And remember, honor begins with truth, and truth begins with one voice refusing to stay silent. Keep speaking, keep surviving. You matter.